cripple the organization's ability to provide education, healthcare, and even food to people in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. It employs 13,000 people in Gaza alone. The ban was introduced by the Israeli parliament in October last year, following allegations that several UNRWA workers were involved in the deadly Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th. Well, let's talk to David Mencer, Israeli government spokesman in the Prime Minister's office. Thank you for joining us here on NewsHour. We knew this ban was coming, but not perhaps how it's going to be implemented. How will you enforce it?
So firstly, from the government of Israel's perspective, I can provide the assurance that Israel's completely committed to the uninterrupted flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, to provide uninterrupted aid to those that need it. And of course, Israel will always operate and will continue to operate in full compliance with international law. But the case against UNRWA was very, very clear. UNRWA are still fixated with this single-digit figures in terms of the number of people involved in terrorism. Our figures...
Yes, nine. It did two separate investigations and found 9 out of 13,000.
Yeah. Well, you know the old poacher gamekeeper scenario. This was a classic case. Israel's investigation found that 1,200 of UNRWA staff were actually also in Hamas. That means teachers, that means people involved in siphoning off the aid, which should have been going to hungry Palestinians and Gazans, was siphoned off to Hamas.
Where is the evidence for that? Because that hasn't ever been presented publicly. And in fact, on the several staff who face those initial allegations, the UN never had any written evidence from your government.
So we have, of course, James, provided all the evidence. We've provided it to Philip Lazzarini. We've provided it to Secretary General Guterres. They've all been informed. On UNRWA, it's very clear now that if a government like the UK, for instance, wants to support the Palestinians or Gazans, then the last thing they should do is support UNRWA, because if a state supports UNRWA, it is funding terrorism.
The United Nations has been clear that without UNRWA, that delivery of aid will not be possible. I mentioned that quote from Philip Lazzarini, who said that the ban would cripple the organization's ability to provide education, healthcare, and so on to Gaza and the occupied West Bank. And Israel has obligations to those territories as an occupying power, doesn't it?
So I've already outlined our obligation, and that is a commitment to keep getting aid in. Philip Lazzarini, unfortunately, is...
But how's that going to be distributed without UNRWA? That's what I'm not clear.
I'll tell you, James, if you let me talk. I will tell you, James, if you let me answer your questions. In December 2024, UNRWA contributed a pathetic 0.6% of Gazans' humanitarian aid. Okay, now, if you're looking about the way forward, we have certainly thought about that. The way forward is clear. It's to redirect aid to UN agencies and other NGOs that do work. Agencies like the World Food Programme, like UNICEF, like UNOPS, they already operate in Gaza and provide aid without the baggage of terror ties. If you want a better future for Gazans, as we all do here in the Israeli government, we don't want to be back at war in another couple of years' time, then these other agencies have got a proven track record of efficiency and accountability and not being tied to terrorism.
Well, let's hear from UNRWA now. David, thank you very much indeed. David Mencer, Israeli government spokesman, joining us live. Let's speak to Juliet Tuma, who's UNRWA's Director of Communications, based in Amman in Jordan. Juliet, thanks for being with us. And just on that last point from David Mencer, UNRWA providing just 0.6% of aid, is that right? And can other UN agencies fill the gap?
Thanks for having me. Look, since the ceasefire kicks in just over 10 days ago, UNRWA brought in 60% of all aid that went into Gaza and also distributed that aid across the Gaza Strip, including in areas that are extremely hard to access, like the north of Gaza.
So what would happen if UNRWA is unable to operate?
Look, if we're not able to operate, it will be catastrophic for the people that we serve, not only in Gaza, who rely on UNRWA for their sheer survival, but in parts of the West Bank where, for one example, we provide schools for 50,000 boys and girls. And no other UN agency does that type of work, that direct delivery, service provision of education and primary healthcare.
What's your understanding of how this ban is going to be enforced? Because it seems to stipulate that there can be no contact between UNRWA staff and Israeli officials. What will that mean in practice?
I don't know, because thus far we've not received communication from the government of Israel on how they plan to implement those bills. What we do know is that they stopped giving visas to UNRWA staff. They expired those visas for humanitarian staff working out of Jerusalem.
And is that, sorry, is that, just to be clear, is that international staff working for the agency?
Absolutely, international staff, thank you. And they were forced to leave Jerusalem yesterday. However, our operations continue. We are staying and delivering. Our clinics are open, including in East Jerusalem. The humanitarian operation in Gaza continues.
Right, so at the moment, things are carrying on as normal, if I can use that word.
We will continue to stay and deliver until we cannot.
And what might stop that? Presumably there do need to be some contacts with Israeli officials. I mean, my understanding, for example, about the staffing of UNRWA is that now the agency is contacting Israel every quarter with lists of staff, partly in case there are problems with staff having affiliations to an organization like Hamas.
Look, not only that, we work very closely with the Israeli army because they help us facilitate the delivery of the trucks that are coming into Gaza, including trucks of fuel, by the way. So we have to coordinate that with the Israeli army. Now, whether this will stop or not, I still do not know that.
If it does, though, will that seriously cause your work to grind to a halt?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, how are we going to operate? How are we going to bring the supplies in? How are we going to deconflict what we call, so that our convoys are not hit during a movement? So absolutely fundamental that we continue. Also fundamental for the success and the continuation of the ceasefire, because without UNRWA in Gaza, the likelihood of this ceasefire falling apart is very high.
Juliet, thank you very much. Juliet Toomer, UNRWA's Director of Communications, joining us live there from Amman in Jordan. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. Do stay with us. As I mentioned, we'll be staying with the Middle East in a few minutes. We'll be hearing about some chaotic scenes at the latest release of hostages from Gaza and what that means for Palestinian detainees being released in return. That's coming up in about 5 minutes' time here on the BBC.
Distribution of BBC NewsHour in the U.S. is supported by Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for chefs and designed for restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found at madeincookware.com. And Progressive. Progressive Commercial Insurance protects small businesses from retailers to tradespeople. Progressive covers a variety of business needs with a range of coverages. More at progressivecommercial.com.
On the next Brian Lehrer Show, our latest visit from a candidate in the New York City mayoral primary. This time it's Democratic State Senator Jessica Ramos of Queens. We'll also get her take from our heavily immigrant district on the deportation program so far. Plus, an explainer on the Chinese AI company DeepSeek and why it's shaking up the U.S. stock market so much. The Brian Lehrer Show, weekdays at 10 a.m. on WNYC.
Support for WNYC comes from Carnegie Hall, which presents jazz vocalist Claudia Acuna, who brings a curated selection of Latin American standards, February 7. Tickets and information at carnegiehall.org.
WNYC, independent journalism in the public interest. 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
This is WNYC. It's 25 degrees at 9:30. I'm Janae Pierre. MTA officials are sharing new data they hope will ease the anger from drivers up in arms over the agency's new $9 congestion pricing tolls. Since the fees went into effect on January 5th, the agency says traffic is flowing way faster in certain areas around the city. In the Holland Tunnel, weekday travel times are down nearly 50% from last year. MTA Chair Jano Lieber says the impact is also being felt far outside of the city.
They're saving time on the Long Island Expressway as they're headed in. They're saving time on the New Jersey Turnpike as they're headed into the Holland or the Lincoln Tunnel, and big amounts of time on top of what they're saving in the actual tunnel or bridge.
The agency notes travel times have slowed in a few locations. Traffic is a bit worse on 9th Avenue and the FDR Drive heading south, but overall the $9 daily charge is having its intended impact of reducing Manhattan's notorious gridlock. New York State lawmakers are considering a new measure that would force some landlords to pay their tenants' rent at other apartments after a fire. WNYC's David Brand has more on the bill, which State Senator Michael Gianaris says is inspired by his reporting.
Gianaris' bill is designed to speed up repairs at fire-damaged buildings, which can often drag on for years, and to keep tenants from having to turn to shelters and other precarious living arrangements. City data shows more than 2,200 people were staying in shelters for victims of fires and other disasters in November. Families with kids wait an average of 9 months to move into a permanent apartment, while single men wait over a year and a half. The new bill would only apply to landlords who are found responsible for a fire or other disaster. The legislation is in committee in the State House.
26 degrees currently. It'll be mostly sunny today with a high around 37. Cloudy skies tonight with a low around 32. It's 9:32.
And welcome back to NewsHour. A new study has found that the Zika virus causes metabolic changes to human skin to make us smell much more attractive to the mosquitoes that carry the disease. Most Zika infections either don't lead to disease or they cause only mild symptoms, but in some cases they can be much more serious, especially for pregnant women. A decade ago, an outbreak in Brazil led to brain development problems in thousands of babies. Nosheen Emami is co-lead author of the study, published in the journal Nature. She's a researcher at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine.
Basically, Zika virus, for its own transmission and survival, they need the mosquitoes to be from one body going to another body. Then because of that, they changing our machinery in our cells, in the skin cells, and then they make us to smell better for Aedes mosquitoes, which are the one they transmit Zika virus.
So we smell better to those mosquitoes, and then the chances of a mosquito landing on our skin and therefore potentially biting and infecting us are higher.
Exactly. The chance of basically landing on us and probing on our body is getting higher. They get the disease and they can transmit it to another person.
So this suggests that the Zika virus, I guess, like all organisms, is active, not passive, active in its desire to spread itself as far as it possibly can.
You are absolutely correct. But virus, because it's very simple and doesn't have any, complicated organs like parasites, for the other scientists, it's very difficult to think it is actually the active process. But we confirm the active because Zika is getting hand in hand with our fibroblast machinery, and they can just transmit and survive.
So what does this mean for I suppose the treatment of Zika, but the prevention of Zika more, isn't it? Is there any way to target that mechanism to stop our skin smelling attractive to those mosquitoes?
No, we don't have anything so far, but this research highlights this discovery, which is we can find a better mechanisms, or actually with the same mechanism we're introducing, we're going with different pathways to block that smell, and then in that way virus cannot send signal to the mosquitoes. That is one of the future discoveries.
And is it possible, if this isn't a stupid question, is it possible that we could just develop some sort of spray for people living in Zika-prone areas, or perhaps when there's an outbreak, that people could spray on their skin that might deter the mosquitoes?
That is one of the ways. We call it repellent. We can just basically find one of the discovery or product can be find materials to mask this smell over the human body or infected body, and then we block the transmission in that kind of regard. But we can also make a trap. We can use this signal, which is the trick Zika virus used for its own transmission and survival. We use this signal, we add it to the traps, we attract that mosquitoes towards that trap, and we kill them.
And that was Nushin Emami from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine and co-lead author of that new study into Zika. You're listening to News Hour live from the BBC World Service. I'm James Menendez. Now, there have been some chaotic scenes during the latest handover of 7 hostages in southern Gaza. Our militants pushed back surging crowds of Palestinians as 2 Israeli civilians, Gadi Moses and Abel Yehud, were escorted into Red Cross vehicles. Mr. Moses is an 80-year-old grandfather. 5 Thai farm workers who were abducted during the October the 7th attacks by Hamas have also been freed today. And earlier, an Israeli soldier, Agam Berger, was released. She's been reunited with her family, who cheered as she was handed over to the Red Cross. Well, as I say, also released were 5 Thai hostages. Werara Srion, the mother of one of the released, was watching a live stream of a vehicle moving slowly through a cheering crowd in Gaza.
We've been waiting for over a year, hoping and praying for him to come back to us. This is what we've been praying for every day. In the end, there was no warning, nothing to prepare us for this. A couple of days ago, there was no sign. But when we spoke to the church clerk, they said it won't be long now. It won't be long before there's good news.
Well, under the terms of the truce, 110 Palestinians are due to be freed from Israeli jails today in exchange for the hostages release, and that's in protest at the way it was all conducted. Let's talk to our correspondent Nick Peake, who joins us now from Tel Aviv. Nick, what is the latest on that? Are those 110 Palestinians, are they going to be freed today?
We don't know for sure, James, but the indications are they may well have found a solution to this, because earlier on we heard very strong language from Prime Minister Netanyahu and other politicians here in Israel saying that what was playing out earlier in Khan Yunis during the release of Abel Yehud in particular, the 29-year-old civilian hostage.
I need to go right here to get on 287 North, and presumably we'll get a view of the actual work that they're doing that has incurred this closed lane. Although maybe not, it's kind of hard to say.
Sort of an agreement was made. Then we heard from the Palestinian prisoners office saying actually at 5 p.m. local time, so about 20 minutes from now, about sort of 3 o'clock UK time, that there would be these releases. So it's not been confirmed, James, but it does seem that this has been resolved, and the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Netanyahu's office, saying that mediators have now delivered a commitment that a safe exit will be guaranteed for the other hostages who will be released in the next rounds to come. So it does seem that they've potentially worked this out.
And just tell us a bit more about the Israeli government's objections. As you say, one of the hostages did seem to be in some distress, but is it also about the way that Hamas and other militants seem to be using these occasions?
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, where I am in Hostages Square in the middle of Tel Aviv, people were watching events unfold on the big screen, and I think the sense you get from people here is that, bearing in mind how the first 2 releases unfolded, there is this element of propaganda, choreography from Hamas. The fact that once again the first hostage who was released today, Agam Berger, was taken up onto a stage. She had this sort of certificate, these items in a bag that she'd been given to sort of mark this 15 months in captivity. Clearly people find that really distasteful, but I think what took it to another level was the way in which that Abel Yehud and Gadi Moses, who's 80 years old, was sort of forced through this crowd of people, which was completely chaotic with no choreography, it would seem. So I think it was that really angered people.
Just a quick one.
Okay, so we're down to a single lane here. I did not realise that, and that has not previously been the case. But of course, I just want to go right, and I have to go left first in order to get past the choke point to go right. So that's why it's so bad today. It's 3 lanes down to 2, and then 2 lanes down to 1. And I don't really see a reason why we couldn't be using this piece of real estate right here in order to have 2 lanes through that choke point. Although maybe it's because of what's happening further down here. Yeah, they want to restrict it to 1 lane early because of whatever's happening further down the road here. Okay, well that was a giant waste of time. Good job I have to drive to work to get a badge swipe and sit in traffic for however long that was.